The bride stood alone in the dusty parlor of the Mojave, California boarding house, staring at the empty metal box that should have contained her life savings, and the weight of betrayal pressed down on her chest like a stone. Delilah Emerson had arrived in this desert town 3 weeks ago with high hopes and a careful plan, traveling all the way from St. Louis with $2,000 sewn into the lining of her traveling case, money her grandmother had left her when she passed. That inheritance was supposed to build a new life, to purchase land, to start fresh in California, where opportunity still bloomed despite the harsh landscape. Instead, she had been foolish enough to trust a smooth-talking man named Richard Pembroke, who had courted her with earnest eyes and promises of forever, who had convinced her to combine their resources for a larger homestead, who had married her just yesterday in a quiet ceremony at the courthouse, and who had disappeared sometime before dawn with every cent. She sank into the worn wooden chair by the window, her wedding dress still hanging on the back of the door, a simple ivory thing that now mocked her with its innocence. The morning sun was already brutal, casting harsh light through the thin curtains, and somewhere outside she could hear the sounds of Mojave waking up, horses whinnying, wagon wheels creaking, the distant hammer of the blacksmith starting his work. Her hands trembled as she pressed them to her face, trying to understand how she had been so blind. Richard had seemed genuine, had worked at the general store, had introduced her to respectable people in town, had made her believe she was finally going to have the stable life she had dreamed of after years of struggling alone. The signs had been there, she realized now, the way he had been eager to marry quickly, the way he had insisted she give him the money for safekeeping since he knew the banker personally, the way he had kissed her forehead last night and told her to sleep well while he handled some business. Delilah was 22 years old, and she had never felt more foolish or alone. Her parents were long dead, her grandmother the only family she had known, and now even that connection felt severed because she had squandered the old woman's final gift. The boarding house owner, Mrs. Chen, had been kind when Delilah stumbled downstairs that morning in a panic, had helped her search the room even though they both knew Richard was long gone, had offered tea and sympathy, but nothing that could fix the gaping hole in Delilah's future. She had exactly $7.30 left to her name, barely enough to pay for another week of lodging, certainly not enough to get back to St. Louis or to start over anywhere else. She forced herself to stand, to move, to think past the crushing weight of despair. The sheriff's office was 2 streets over, and she made her way there on unsteady legs, her practical gray traveling dress already collecting dust from the unpaved roads. Mojave in 1882 was a town built on railroad hopes and mining dreams, a collection of wooden buildings scattered across the desert like dice thrown by a careless hand, and the sheriff's office was a small structure with peeling paint and a single cell visible through the barred window. Sheriff Dawson was a heavy-set man with tired eyes who listened to her story with a sympathetic expression that told her everything she needed to know before he even spoke. "Miss Emerson, or I suppose it is Mrs. Pembroke now," he said slowly, removing his hat and setting it on the desk between them. "I am real sorry this happened to you. Truth is, you are not the first person Richard Pembroke has taken advantage of. We have been looking for him for near about 6 months now, ever since he pulled a similar scheme over in Barstow." The words hit her like physical blows. "You knew he was a criminal. We knew someone matching his description was wanted, but he has been using different names, different stories. By the time word reaches us and we can verify, he is already gone." The sheriff spread his hands helplessly. "He is a confidence man, miss. He knows how to disappear. So you will not go after him." Her voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. He stole $2,000. That is everything I have in the world. I will send telegrams to neighboring towns, put out notices, but he could be in any direction by now, and I do not have the resources to chase every criminal across the territory. I am real sorry, miss. I truly am. Sheriff Dawson's regret seemed genuine, but it did nothing to solve her problem. Delilah left the office feeling hollowed out, walking without direction through streets that shimmered with heat even though it was barely 9 in the morning. She found herself at the edge of town where the buildings gave way to scrubland, and the railroad tracks cut through the landscape like a scar. A few men were working near the depot, loading freight onto a waiting train, and she watched them with empty eyes, trying to figure out what she was supposed to do now. She could try to find work, but most respectable jobs for women paid poorly, and it would take months to save enough to leave or to start over. She could write to acquaintances back in St. Louis, but she had no close friends there, no one who would send her money or take her in. She was trapped in this desert town with nothing but her clothes and the crushing knowledge of her own naivety. You look like someone stole your horse and shot your dog. The voice came from behind her, low and rough with a hint of amusement that should have been offensive but somehow was not. She turned to find a man standing a few feet away, tall and lean with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of whiskey in lamplight. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, dusty boots and worn denim, and a hat that had seen better days. And there was something about the way he stood that suggested he was entirely comfortable in his own skin. "Forgive me, that was not a kind way to start a conversation. You just look like you have had a real bad morning. You could say that." She did not have the energy to be polite or to follow the usual social conventions. "My husband stole everything I own and disappeared." The man's expression shifted immediately, the hint of humor vanishing. "Richard Pembroke," she stared at him. "You know him, know of him. I have been tracking him for the better part of 2 weeks now." He stepped closer, and she could see the details of his face now: strong jaw, straight nose, a small scar above his left eyebrow, the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from years of outdoor work. "Name is Tobias Fletcher. I am a ranch hand over at the Double Creek spread, or I was until recently. Pembroke came through about a month back, worked for the ranch for 3 weeks, then vanished with the payroll, about $800 that was meant to pay 15 men for their work. The owner sent me after him because I know the territory and because I am stubborn enough not to quit. You have been following him for 2 weeks. Hope flickered in her chest, small and painful. "Do you know where he went?" Tobias shook his head slowly. "Lost his trail around Daggett, but I heard rumors he was here in Mojave, heard he was courting someone. I rode in this morning hoping to catch him, but I am guessing I am too late. He left before dawn. Took $2,000. The number still felt unreal when she said it out loud. "The sheriff says there is nothing he can do. Sheriff Dawson is a good man, but he is limited by jurisdiction and resources. Me, I do not have those particular constraints." Tobias studied her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "When did he leave? What direction?" "I do not know. I was asleep. I woke up and he was gone." The admission made her feel even more foolish. "I should have known. I should have seen through him. Confidence men are good at what they do, miss. That is why they keep getting away with it. Do not blame yourself for being trusting." His voice was surprisingly gentle. "I am going to find him. I made a promise to my boss and to the other ranch hands that I would get their money back, and I keep my promises. If he has your money too, I will make sure you get it back." She wanted to believe him, but belief had already cost her everything. "Why would you do that? You do not even know me." "Because it is the right thing to do, and because I hate seeing people like Pembroke get away with hurting decent folks." Tobias adjusted his hat, his jaw set with determination. I need to ask you some questions about him. Anything that might help me figure out where he is headed. You up for that? They walked back to the boarding house together, and Delilah found herself telling this stranger everything she knew about Richard Pembroke, which was painfully little. He had claimed to be from Nevada originally, had mentioned an uncle in San Francisco, had talked about wanting to invest in silver mines, but she had no way of knowing what was truth and what was fabrication. Tobias listened carefully, asking specific questions about habits, preferences, things Richard had said in passing, and she realized he was methodical in a way that suggested real skill at tracking. Mrs. Chen brought them coffee in the small sitting room, and Tobias sat across from Delilah with a small notebook, writing down details in neat, careful handwriting that surprised her. Most cowboys she had encountered were rough men with little education, but Tobias seemed different, more thoughtful, more deliberate. He had told her he was 26, had been working ranches since he was 16, had learned tracking from an Apache scout who worked for one of the spreads he had hired on with. There was something solid about him, something that made her feel like maybe not everyone in the world was a liar and a cheat. He talked a lot about San Bernardino, she remembered suddenly. He said there were good opportunities there, better than in Mojave. I thought he meant for us, for our future together. The bitterness in her voice was sharp enough to cut. Tobias looked up from his notes. San Bernardino is west of here, about a day's hard ride or 2 days at a normal pace. If he left before dawn, he would have maybe 6 hours head start. Problem is, that is a big area to search, and he could have gone in any direction. So you might not find him. She felt the hope that had briefly sparked starting to die again. I did not say that. I just said it will be challenging. He closed the notebook and looked at her directly. I am going to be straight with you, Miss Emerson. This could take days or even weeks. I do not know how long you plan to stay in Mojave, but I need you to be prepared for the possibility that this will not be quick. I do not have anywhere else to go. The admission hurt, but it was true. I cannot afford to go anywhere, and I cannot afford to stay here much longer either. Tobias was quiet for a moment, and she could see him working through something in his mind. How much money do you have left? $7.30. He winced. That is not much. Look, I know this is going to sound improper, but hear me out. I have enough saved to cover supplies and lodging for both of us while I am tracking Pembroke. When I find him and get the money back, you can pay me back if you want, or you can consider it part of making things right. Either way, you should not have to worry about starving or sleeping rough while I am hunting this bastard down. Delilah felt her cheeks burn. I cannot take money from you. I do not even know you. You do not have a lot of options, Miss Emerson, and I am offering as a practical solution, not charity. I need you here in case Pembroke comes back or in case I need more information, and you cannot help me if you are desperate and scared. His tone was matter of fact, not pitying, which somehow made it easier to hear. Besides, I was raised to help people when I can. My mother would come back and haunt me if I left a woman stranded with no resources. There was something about the way he said it, with just a hint of humor but underlying seriousness, that made her trust him despite everything that had just happened with Richard. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was the exhaustion of carrying fear and shame alone, but she found herself nodding. I will pay you back every cent, I promise. I believe you. Tobias stood, settling his hat back on his head. I am going to head to the stable, check with the hostler about horses that left early this morning, then ride out and see if I can pick up a trail. I will be back by nightfall to let you know what I found. Meanwhile, you should rest. You look about ready to fall over. She wanted to argue, but he was right. She had barely slept the night before, too nervous and excited about her wedding, about the future she thought she was building, and then this morning had drained whatever reserve she had left. After Tobias left, she went upstairs to her room and lay down on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering how her life had gone so completely wrong in such a short time. Sleep eventually claimed her, heavy and dreamless, and when she woke the sun was setting, painting the room in shades of orange and gold. She found Tobias in the dining room of the boarding house, eating a plate of stew that Mrs. Chen must have prepared. He gestured for her to join him, and another plate appeared almost immediately, the older woman's kindness a small comfort. Delilah realized she had not eaten all day, and the food tasted better than it had any right to. Simple beef and vegetables and fresh bread that soaked up the gravy. "I found his trail," Tobias said between bites. "He left heading west on a brown and white Pinto, moving fast. The hostler remembers him because he paid double the usual rate for the horse and did not haggle. Man in a hurry. So he is going to San Bernardino. That is my guess." I talked to a few other people, stage coach driver, some folks who were up early. A man matching Pembroke's description was seen heading toward the rail line, but he was on horseback, not taking the train. That suggests he is trying to stay off the main routes where people might recognize him or where law enforcement might be looking. Tobias paused, studying her face. "I am heading out first light tomorrow. It will probably be faster if I go alone, but I wanted to ask if there is anything else you remember that might help." Delilah thought hard, replaying every conversation she had with Richard, every moment they had spent together. He was left-handed. "I do not know if that matters, but I noticed because my grandmother was left-handed too, and he had a scar on his right hand, between his thumb and first finger, shaped like a crescent moon. He said he got it as a child. That is good. Details like that make identification easier." Tobias made more notes. "Anything else? Did he mention names of people he knew, places he had been? He talked about working in mining camps, said he had been up in Nevada during the Silver Rush. He mentioned Virginia City once, said it was too wild for his taste." She tried to remember more. "He liked cards, poker specifically. He said he was good at reading people." Tobias's expression darkened at that. "I bet he is. Probably how he sized up his marks." He finished his food and pushed the plate away. "I am going to get some sleep. Got a long ride ahead of me tomorrow. You need anything before I head out, just bring him back." She meant to sound strong, but her voice cracked on the last word. "I need my money back. I need to know there is some justice in the world. I will do everything I can." Tobias stood, then hesitated. "For what it is worth, Miss Emerson, I think you are handling this about as well as anyone could. Take strength to keep going after getting knocked down like you have been." The words surprised her, and she felt tears prick her eyes for the first time since discovering the theft. She blinked them back, nodding her thanks, and watched him leave the dining room with that easy, confident stride. Mrs. Chen came to sit with her after a while, and the two women talked about nothing and everything, about the weather and the railroad and the price of flour, anything to keep Delilah's mind from spiraling into dark places. The days that followed were some of the longest of Delilah's life. Tobias had left money with Mrs. Chen to cover her room and board, and though Delilah's pride stung at accepting it, she had no choice. She helped around the boarding house to feel less like a charity case, cleaning rooms and helping with laundry and cooking, and Mrs. Chen accepted the help gratefully. The older woman had come to California 20 years ago with her husband, had built the boarding house from nothing after he died, and she had her own stories of hardship and survival that made Delilah feel less alone. On the third day, Delilah was hanging laundry in the backyard when she heard horse hooves and turned to see Tobias riding up, dusty and tired but with a glint in his eyes that made her heart leap. She dropped the sheet she was holding and ran to meet him, propriety forgotten. "You found him." "Not yet, but I am close. He was in Victorville 2 days ago, sold the Pinto and bought a gray gelding. He is definitely heading towards San Bernardino, and he is moving slower now, probably thinks he is in the clear." Tobias dismounted, and she could see the exhaustion in the set of his shoulders. "I need to rest the horse for a few hours and get some supplies, then I am heading out again. He has maybe a day's lead on me now, and he does not know I am coming. Let me come with you." The words were out before she could think them through. Tobias looked at her in surprise. "Miss Emerson, it is going to be hard riding, possibly dangerous. Pembroke might not go quietly when I catch up to him. He is my husband, legally at least. He stole my money. I deserve to be there when you confront him." She lifted her chin, trying to project more confidence than she felt. "I can ride. I am not delicate, and you might need someone who can identify him absolutely. I can identify him just fine from the descriptions I have." But Tobias was wavering, she could see it. "It is not proper for you to be traveling alone with me. People will talk. People will talk anyway. I am already a woman who was foolish enough to marry a con man. My reputation is not exactly pristine." The bitterness was back in her voice. "Please, I need to see this through. I need to look him in the eye and know that he did not win." Tobias studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "You are sure about this?" "I am sure." "Then we leave in 3 hours. Bring only what you can carry in saddlebags, dress practical, and be prepared to sleep rough. This is not going to be a comfortable journey." The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. Mrs. Chen helped her pack, providing supplies and advice in equal measure. And though the older woman clearly had doubts about the propriety of the situation, she seemed to understand Delilah's need to take control of her own fate. Delilah changed into her most practical dress, a dark blue cotton that would not show dirt too badly, and pulled her hair back in a simple braid. She had one good pair of riding boots that her grandmother had given her years ago, and she was grateful for them now. Tobias was waiting with 2 horses when she came downstairs, his own rangy chestnut, and a smaller bay mare that he said was gentle, but had good stamina. He helped her mount, and she was grateful that she had learned to ride as a girl, even though it had been years since she had spent significant time on horseback. They rode out of Mojave heading west, and Delilah tried not to think about the fact that she was riding off into the desert with a man she barely knew, chasing another man who had proven to be a complete stranger, despite their marriage vows. The landscape was harsh and beautiful in equal measure, all red rock and scattered sage, mountains rising in the distance like broken teeth. Tobias set a steady pace, not pushing too hard but not dawdling either, and he kept checking back to make sure she was managing. The heat was intense despite it being October, and Delilah was grateful when they stopped to water the horses at a small creek that cut through the landscape like a miracle. "You are doing good," Tobias said, offering her his canteen. "Most town women would be complaining by now." "I am not most town women." She drank deeply, the water lukewarm but welcome. "My grandmother raised me to be practical. She said complaining never fixed anything. Smart woman." Tobias refilled the canteen from the creek. "Tell me about her." So Delilah talked as they rode, telling him about the grandmother who had taken her in after her parents died in a cholera outbreak, who had taught her to read and cook and manage money, who had worked as a seamstress to support them both. Talking about her grandmother made the ache of loss sharper, but it also reminded her why she was doing this, why she could not let Richard Pembroke win. That money represented her grandmother's years of hard work, her sacrifices, her dreams for Delilah's future. Tobias shared his own stories too, about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, about losing his parents when he was young and being raised by an older brother who had died 5 years ago in a riding accident. He talked about the ranches he had worked, the people he had met, the vastness of the territory, and how easy it was to disappear if you wanted to. He had a way of talking that was easy to listen to, his voice low and steady, and Delilah found herself relaxing despite the circumstances. They made camp as the sun was setting, finding a spot in the lee of some large rocks that provided shelter and concealment. Tobias built a small fire and cooked beans and salt pork, simple food that tasted good after the long ride. Delilah sat on her bedroll, watching the stars come out in a sky that seemed impossibly vast, and tried to remember the last time she had felt this far from civilization. "You should get some sleep," Tobias said, banking the fire. "I will take first watch." "Watch for what?" "Could be anything out here. Bandits, wild animals, or just strangers who might have bad intentions. Better safe than sorry." He settled with his back against a rock, rifle across his lap, looking perfectly comfortable. "I will wake you in a few hours and you can take second watch if you want." Delilah lay down on her bedroll, pulling the thin blanket over herself, and stared up at the stars. She should have been frightened, should have been questioning every decision that had led her to this moment, but instead she felt strangely calm. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was the simple fact that she was finally doing something instead of being a passive victim. She drifted off to sleep with that thought, and when Tobias woke her for second watch, she sat by the dying fire and watched the desert slowly reveal itself in shades of gray as dawn approached. They rode through Victorville the next day, and Tobias stopped to ask questions at the stable and the saloon, confirming that Richard had been there and was continuing west. The trail was getting warmer, and Delilah could feel the tension rising, a mixture of anticipation and dread. What would she say to Richard when they found him? What would he say to her? Did he feel any guilt at all, or was she just another mark in a long line of people he had deceived? That night, they camped near the Cajon Pass, and Tobias estimated they were less than a day behind Richard now. "He is staying in towns, sleeping in hotels. That slows him down. We have been traveling harder and faster, and we are catching up. What happens when we find him?" Delilah asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. "I confront him, get the money back, and we turn him over to the nearest law. Sheriff in San Bernardino should be able to hold him while we sort out charges from multiple jurisdictions." Tobias poked at the fire with a stick. "I am not going to lie to you, Miss Emerson. He might fight. He might run. It might get ugly. I understand." She did understand, intellectually at least, though she had no real experience with violence or confrontation. "I just want my money back. I want to be able to start over." "You will." Tobias said it with such certainty that she almost believed him. "And for what it is worth, when this is over, you should not let this experience sour you on people entirely. Most folks are decent. You just had the bad luck to run into one who was not. Were you ever married?" The question came out before she could stop it. Too personal, too intrusive. But Tobias did not seem offended. "No, came close once, girl I knew back in Texas. But ranch life is hard, and I was not in a position to support a wife, and she found someone who was. I do not blame her for it." He looked at Delilah across the fire. "I figure when the right person comes along, I will know it. Until then, I am content enough." They reached San Bernardino the following afternoon, a town larger and more established than Mojave, with real streets and brick buildings and a sense of permanence. Tobias went straight to the sheriff's office, and Delilah waited outside, holding the horses and trying to control the nervous flutter in her stomach. When Tobias emerged, he had another man with him, a deputy with a young face and serious eyes. "Deputy Mills is going to help us," Tobias explained. "I described Pembroke, and the deputy says there is a man matching that description staying at the Grand Hotel. We are going to go there now and see if it is him." The Grand Hotel was 3 stories of whitewashed wood with a covered porch and rocking chairs, far nicer than anything Richard would have been able to afford before stealing all that money. Delilah felt anger rise in her throat, hot and bitter, as they walked through the front door. The clerk at the desk confirmed that a Mr. Richard Pembroke was indeed a guest, room 212, and Tobias exchanged a look with Deputy Mills. "Let me and the deputy go up first," Tobias said to Delilah. "If it is him and he is there, we will handle it. You wait here." "No," her voice was firm. "I am going up. I need to see him." Tobias looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression must have convinced him. They climbed the stairs together, the deputy in front with his hand on his gun, Tobias behind him, and Delilah bringing up the rear. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. They reached room 212 and Deputy Mills knocked sharply. "Who is it?" The voice from inside was Richard's, and hearing it made Delilah's hands clench into fists. "Deputy Mills, San Bernardino Sheriff's Office." "Need to talk to you, Mr. Pembroke." There was a moment of silence, then the sound of rapid movement inside the room. Tobias swore and threw his shoulder against the door, which splintered under the impact. They burst into the room to find Richard at the window, one leg already through, clearly planning to climb down or jump. Deputy Mills grabbed him and hauled him back inside, and Richard struggled briefly before seeing the gun in the deputy's hand and going still. "Hello, Richard." Delilah stepped into the room, and the look of recognition and then fear that crossed his face was almost satisfying. "Did you really think you would get away with it?" "Delilah, I can explain." His voice was pleading, that same earnest tone he had used to court her, and it made her sick. "It was not personal. I had debts, people after me. I was desperate." "So you married me and stole everything I had." Her voice shook with rage. "You looked me in the eyes and promised forever, and you were planning to rob me the entire time. I did care for you. I do care for you." Richard was handcuffed now, Deputy Mills holding him firmly. "We can work this out. We are married. You cannot testify against me." "You are right. We are married legally." Delilah stepped closer to him. "Which means you committed theft against your wife, which some judges consider even worse. And I will do everything in my power to see you punished." Tobias had been searching the room while this exchange happened, and he emerged from the wardrobe with a carpet bag that clinked when he moved it. He opened it on the bed, revealing stacks of cash, some coins, and various items of jewelry. "I am guessing this is not all yours, Pembroke." Richard's face had gone pale. "You cannot prove anything." "I can prove the $800 you stole from the Double Creek Ranch because I was there when you took it. I am guessing Miss Emerson can identify her $2,000, and the rest of this is probably from other jobs you pulled." Tobias looked at the man with open disgust. "You have been busy." They took Richard to the sheriff's office, and Delilah sat in a hard wooden chair while Tobias and Deputy Mills counted out the money with the sheriff overseeing. Her $2,000 was there, mostly in bills just as she had given it to Richard, along with the ranch payroll and another $900 that no one could immediately account for. There was also a collection of jewelry that Richard admitted, under pressure, he had taken from various women in various towns, each one a victim of his practiced charm. "It is going to take time to sort all this out," Sheriff Morrison said, a grizzled man with gray in his beard and a no-nonsense attitude. "We will need statements from everyone involved, need to contact law enforcement in other jurisdictions, Need to process charges. You folks are going to be here for a few days at least. Tobias and Delilah found rooms at a smaller, cheaper hotel than the Grand, and that evening they sat in the dining room, exhausted but relieved. Delilah's money was in her possession again, safely locked in the hotel safe, and Richard was in a cell where he belonged. She should have felt triumphant, but instead she just felt tired and oddly empty. "What are you going to do now?" Tobias asked, working through a plate of chicken and potatoes. "I do not know." It was the honest answer. "I came to California to start over, but I do not know if Mojave is where I want to be. I do not know if I want to stay anywhere Richard has been." "That is fair." Tobias was quiet for a moment. "The Double Creek Ranch is up near Lone Pine, north of here. Beautiful country, mountains, and open range. They are always looking for good people, and with your money you could buy a small spread nearby, maybe run some cattle or horses. It is quieter than the mining towns, more settled." "Why are you telling me this?" She studied his face, trying to read his expression. "Because I am planning to head back there after we are done here, and because I think you might like it." He met her eyes directly. "And because these past few days, riding with you, talking with you, I have realized I enjoy your company. Thought maybe you might want to continue the acquaintance." Delilah felt her cheeks flush. "Mr. Fletcher, are you suggesting what I think you are suggesting?" "I am suggesting that when you figure out where you want to go and what you want to do, you might consider heading north. I am suggesting that I would like to get to know you better properly, without criminals and chases involved." He smiled, and it transformed his face from handsome to something warmer. "I am suggesting that maybe something good could come out of all this bad." She did not know what to say to that, so she focused on her food, her mind racing. The idea of trusting another man so soon after Richard seemed insane, but Tobias had proven himself honest and capable and kind. He had tracked Richard across the territory, had helped her get her money back, had treated her with respect and consideration even when he could have easily taken advantage of her vulnerable position. He was nothing like Richard, and maybe that was exactly the point. They spent 4 more days in San Bernardino, giving statements and helping the sheriff piece together the full scope of Richard's crimes. It turned out there were at least 7 other victims across 3 territories, some of them women like Delilah, others businessmen or ranchers he had worked for briefly before stealing and disappearing. The total amount was somewhere close to $10,000, and the charges were serious enough that Richard was looking at significant prison time. On the 3rd day, they went to the courthouse to deal with the annulment of her marriage. The judge was sympathetic when he heard the circumstances, and the process was straightforward since the marriage had never been consummated and had been entered into under false pretenses. Walking out of that courthouse as Delilah Emerson again instead of Delilah Pembroke felt like shedding a skin that had never fit properly. Tobias was waiting outside, leaning against the railing with his hat tipped back, and he straightened when he saw her. "How did it go?" "It is done. I am not married anymore." She felt lighter somehow, less burdened. "I can move forward now. Good." He fell into step beside her as they walked back toward the hotel. "I have been thinking about what comes next. I need to get the ranch payroll back to my boss, which means heading north. You need to figure out what you want to do with your life, which could mean going anywhere. But I am hoping you will consider coming north with me, at least for a visit. See the country, see if it suits you." "People will talk," she said, echoing his words from days earlier. A single woman traveling with a single man. Let them talk. Anyone who knows us will know we are being proper. Anyone who does not know us does not matter. Tobias stopped walking and turned to face her. "I am not going to pretend I know where this is going, Delilah. I just know that I like you, respect you, and want to spend more time with you. If you feel the same, then come north with me. If you do not, then I will wish you well and we will part as friends." She should have needed more time to think, should have been more cautious, but something in her heart was certain. "I feel the same, and yes, I will come north with you." They left San Bernardino 2 days later, after the sheriff confirmed that he had everything he needed from them, and Richard was securely processed into the system. Tobias had the ranch payroll, minus what he had spent on the chase, and Delilah had her $2,000 safely sewn back into her traveling case. They rode north through country that grew increasingly spectacular, the desert giving way to grassland, and then to the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains. The Double Creek Ranch was everything Tobias had promised, and more, a sprawling operation nestled in a valley with Mount Whitney visible in the distance. The owner, a man named Samuel Harris, was effusive in his thanks to Tobias for recovering the payroll, and he welcomed Delilah with open hospitality, offering her a room in the main house until she could figure out her plans. The ranch hands were a mixed group, some young, some old, all of them hardworking and decent, and they treated Delilah with friendly respect that felt genuine. Over the following weeks, Delilah fell into a routine at the ranch. She helped Mrs. Harris with cooking and household tasks, explored the surrounding area, and spent long evenings talking with Tobias when he came in from his work. They were careful to maintain propriety, always with others around, but the attraction between them grew steadily stronger. She learned that he loved the land with a fierce passion, that he was patient with animals and had a gift for training horses, that he was surprisingly well-read and could quote poetry when the mood struck him. He learned that she was smart and stubborn and had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard, that she was interested in everything and asked thoughtful questions, that she had a beautiful laugh that he found himself working to provoke. One evening in late November, they were walking along the creek that gave the ranch its name, and Tobias took her hand. It was the first time he had touched her beyond helping her mount a horse or guiding her elbow, and the contact sent warmth through her entire body. "I have been thinking," he said slowly. "There is a piece of land for sale adjacent to the ranch, about 200 acres with water rights and a small house. It has been sitting empty for a year, and the bank is willing to sell for a reasonable price because they just want someone to work it." That sounds like a good opportunity. She was not sure where he was going with this. It is a good opportunity for the right person, someone who wants to build something, who is not afraid of hard work. He stopped walking and turned to face her. "I have some money saved and you have your inheritance. Together we could buy that land, build it into something real." Her heart started beating faster. "Tobias, what exactly are you asking?" "I am asking if you would consider marrying me. Not right away, not until you are ready, but eventually. I am asking if you could see a future with me, building a life together on our own piece of land." He squeezed her hand gently. "I know it has not been long, and I know you just went through hell with Pembroke. But I also know that what I feel for you is real, and I think what you feel for me is real too." Delilah looked up at him, at this man who had ridden across the territory to right a wrong, who had treated her with kindness and respect, who was offering her not just security but partnership. "I am scared," she admitted. "I am scared of making another mistake, of trusting the wrong person again." "That is understandable. I am not asking you to trust blindly. Take all the time you need. Get to know me better. Ask anyone on this ranch about my character. Make sure you are certain." His voice was steady, patient. "I will wait as long as it takes." She thought about her grandmother, about the advice the old woman had given her over the years. Trust your instincts. Be practical, but do not be so afraid of risk that you miss out on joy. Choose someone who treats you as an equal. Tobias met all those criteria, and her instincts were telling her that this was right, that he was right. "I do not need more time," she said, and saw his eyes widen in surprise. "I have watched you these past weeks. I have seen how you treat people, how you work, how you honor your commitments. I have seen who you are, Tobias Fletcher, and I want to build a life with you. So yes, I will marry you." He pulled her close then, wrapping his arms around her, and she leaned into his strength, feeling safe and chosen in a way she had not with Richard. When he kissed her, it was gentle and thorough, a promise of things to come, and she kissed him back with equal measure, letting herself hope and dream again. They were married in January of 1883 in a small ceremony at the ranch with the Harris family and all the ranch hands in attendance. Delilah wore a new dress that Mrs. Harris had helped her sew, a deep green wool that brought out the color of her eyes, and Tobias wore his best suit, looking uncomfortable but happy. The circuit preacher pronounced them man and wife, and this time Delilah felt the rightness of it in her bones. No doubts, no shadows, just joy and certainty. They bought the land and spent the early months of their marriage fixing up the small house, making it into a home. Tobias taught Delilah about ranching, and she proved to be a quick learner, good with horses and unafraid of hard work. They bought a small herd of cattle and some horses, and Tobias's skill at training proved profitable. Delilah started a vegetable garden and began keeping chickens, and slowly their little ranch became productive and self-sustaining. The nights were Delilah's favorite time, when they would sit together on the porch they had built, watching the sun set over the mountains, talking about their day and their dreams. Tobias told her stories about his travels, about the people he had met and the places he had seen. And she told him about her childhood, about her grandmother, about the books she had read and the places she wanted to visit someday. They made love with tenderness and growing passion, learning each other's bodies, building intimacy that went far beyond the physical. By summer, Delilah realized she was pregnant, and the joy on Tobias's face when she told him was something she knew she would remember forever. He became even more protective, always making sure she did not work too hard, and she had to remind him frequently that pregnancy was not an illness. Mrs. Harris became a font of advice and support, helping Delilah prepare for the baby, and the community of ranch families in the area rallied around them with gifts and well wishes. Their son was born in late February of 1884, a healthy boy with his father's eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. They named him Thomas, after Tobias's brother, and Delilah thought her heart might burst from the love she felt holding her son for the first time. Tobias was a devoted father, always finding time to spend with Thomas despite the demands of the ranch, and watching him with their child made Delilah fall even more deeply in love with him. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, cattle that got sick and fences that needed constant repair. Money was tight sometimes, and they had to make careful decisions about what to invest in and what to put off. But they faced everything together, partners in the truest sense, and the ranch slowly grew and prospered under their combined efforts. When Thomas was 2 years old, Delilah became pregnant again, and this time they had a daughter they named Dorothy, after Delilah's grandmother. She was a quiet baby where Thomas had been fussy, content to watch the world with solemn eyes, and Tobias joked that she was already showing signs of her mother's thoughtful nature. Watching Tobias with both children, seeing him roughhouse with Thomas, and then cradle Dorothy with infinite gentleness, Delilah sometimes had to pinch herself to believe this was her life. One evening in the summer of 1887, when Thomas was 3 and Dorothy was 1, they sat on the porch as usual, the children asleep inside. Tobias had his arm around Delilah's shoulders, and she leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the security of his presence. "Do you ever think about how we met?" she asked quietly. "How something so terrible led to something so good?" "I think about it sometimes." Tobias pressed a kiss to her temple. "I think about how I was supposed to be tracking a criminal and I found you instead. Best thing that ever happened to me." "He got 15 years in prison, you know. I got the letter from the sheriff in San Bernardino last month." She had not told Tobias yet, had been processing the information herself. "Part of me feels like it is not enough for what he did to all those people. Part of me just feels grateful that it is over and he cannot hurt anyone else for a long time." That is a good way to feel. You do not have to hate him forever. You just have to live your best life despite what he tried to do to you. Tobias tilted her chin up so he could look at her. "And I would say you are doing a pretty good job of that." She smiled, that genuine full smile that had taken her months to reclaim after Richard. "We are doing a good job, both of us." "Yeah," Tobias agreed. "We are." The years continued to unfold in seasons of work and joy. Thomas grew into a sturdy boy who loved horses and wanted to be just like his father, following Tobias around the ranch whenever allowed. Dorothy was quieter but just as determined, showing an early aptitude for reading and learning that reminded Delilah so much of her grandmother. In 1889, they had another son, Daniel, who was cheerful and energetic and kept them all on their toes. The ranch prospered, and they were able to buy additional land, expanding their herd and their operations. Tobias developed a reputation as one of the best horse trainers in the region, and people would travel from far away to buy horses he had worked with. Delilah managed the business side, proving to have a head for numbers and negotiations that surprised even her. They became respected members of their community, known for their fairness and their willingness to help neighbors in need. One day in the spring of 1892, a letter arrived addressed to Delilah. It was from a lawyer in San Francisco, informing her that she had been listed as a beneficiary in a will. Confused, she read further and discovered that one of Richard Pembroke's other victims, a wealthy widow he had swindled years before Delilah, had passed away. The woman had followed Richard's trial and sentencing, had learned about the multiple victims, and had left small bequests to each of them in her will. Delilah's share was $500. She showed the letter to Tobias that evening, unsure how to feel about this unexpected windfall tied to such painful memories. It seems wrong somehow to profit from that situation even indirectly. Tobias read the letter carefully. This woman wanted to do something kind, to help the people Richard hurt. There is no shame in accepting that. Maybe you could use it for something meaningful, something that honors the spirit of her gift. After much thought, Delilah decided to use the money to establish a small lending fund for women in their community who needed help starting businesses or making investments, but could not get traditional bank loans. She worked with the local church to set up the system, and over the years, dozens of women benefited from those funds, starting dressmaking businesses and bakeries and small shops. It became a legacy that Delilah was proud of, turning something born from betrayal into a tool for empowerment. Thomas was 12, Dorothy was 10, and Daniel was 5 when Tobias came home one evening with news that surprised them all. The state was establishing a new program to help settle and develop the more remote regions, and they were looking for experienced ranchers to serve as advisors. Tobias had been offered a position that would require him to travel several months out of the year, but would also come with additional compensation and prestige. They discussed it as a family, because that was how they made important decisions, and in the end, Tobias decided to accept. The travel was difficult, and Delilah missed him terribly when he was gone, but she was capable of running the ranch in his absence with help from their hired hands, and the children adjusted to their father's comings and goings. When Tobias was home, he was fully present, devoted to his family, and Delilah learned that missing him made the reunions even sweeter. In 1895, when Delilah was 35 and Tobias was 39, they celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner at home. The children fed and sent to bed early so they could have time alone. Delilah looked across the table at her husband, seeing the silver threading through his hair now, the lines around his eyes from years of sun and hard work and laughter, and felt overwhelming gratitude for the life they had built. "I have something for you," Tobias said, pulling a small wrapped package from his pocket. "It is not much, but I saw it and thought of you." She unwrapped it carefully to find a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny engraved horse. "It is beautiful. There is an inscription." He took the bracelet and showed her the inside, where tiny letters read from rough beginnings, "Something beautiful." Delilah felt tears prick her eyes. "I love it. I love you. I love you too. More than I ever thought it was possible to love someone." Tobias fastened the bracelet around her wrist. "You took a chance on me when you had every reason not to trust anyone, and you have made me happier than I ever imagined I could be. I want you to know that, today and always." They danced in the kitchen to no music, swaying together in the lamplight, and Delilah rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. This man had saved her in more ways than one, had given her back not just her money but her faith in goodness and partnership and love. And she had saved him too, she realized, had given him the family and home he had always wanted but never expected to find. Thomas left for college in 1898, heading east to study agriculture and business with plans to return and expand the ranch. Dorothy showed interest in teaching, and they supported her dream of attending normal school. Daniel was still young, but already showing signs of his father's talent with horses. The ranch continued to thrive, and Delilah and Tobias started talking about eventually retiring, maybe traveling to some of those places they had always discussed. But retirement was still years away, and for now, they were content with the rhythm of their days, the satisfaction of work well done, the joy of family dinners and quiet evenings. Delilah sometimes thought back to that terrible morning in Mojave, when she had discovered Richard's betrayal, when her world had seemed to end. She would never be grateful for that pain, but she could acknowledge that it had led her to this life, to this man, to this happiness that was earned and chosen and real. On a warm evening in July of 1902, when they were both sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, Tobias took her hand and laced their fingers together. "You ever regret it, staying here, building this life with me instead of going somewhere more exciting?" "Never." Delilah squeezed his hand. "This is exactly where I am supposed to be, with you, with our children, with this land we have built together. I would not change a single thing. Not even the beginning, the part with Pembroke." She considered that carefully. "I would not want to go through that again. But if I changed it, I might not have found you. So no, I would not change it. Every difficult thing led me here, and here is exactly where I want to be." Tobias pulled her close, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the day fade into night. The ranch was quiet around them, the horses settled in the barn, the cattle bedded down for the night, their children grown or growing, pursuing their own dreams while knowing they always had home to return to. Thomas came back from college in 1903 with a degree and a wife, a smart young woman named Catherine, who fell in love with the ranch and the family immediately. They built a house on the far end of the property, and Thomas began implementing new techniques he had learned, helping the ranch evolve and adapt to changing times. Dorothy finished normal school and took a teaching position in Lone Pine, close enough to visit regularly, and she met a kind doctor who courted her properly and married her in 1905. Daniel was shaping up to be an even better horseman than his father, and at 18, he was talking about starting his own breeding program. In 1907, Delilah became a grandmother when Thomas and Catherine had a daughter they named Grace. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Delilah thought about her own grandmother, about the inheritance that had started this whole journey, and she felt the circle completing itself. She would make sure Grace and any other grandchildren knew their great-great-grandmother's story, knew about the strength and determination that ran in their family, knew that they came from people who faced hardship and overcame it. Tobias was a devoted grandfather, just as he had been a devoted father, and watching him teach Grace to be gentle with the horses, seeing the patience and love in his every interaction with her, made Delilah fall in love with him all over again. They had been married for 24 years, and her love for him had only deepened with time, becoming something rich and complex and utterly essential. Dorothy had twin boys in 1908, and Daniel married a neighboring rancher's daughter in 1909. And suddenly, the family was expanding in wonderful, chaotic ways. Sunday dinners became major productions with 3 generations gathered around the table, and the ranch felt alive with voices and laughter. Delilah and Tobias were considering building an addition to the house to accommodate everyone, and the planning sessions were full of debate and humor. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1913, Tobias surprised Delilah with a trip to San Francisco, just the two of them, something they had talked about for years, but never made happen. They stayed in a fine hotel, ate in restaurants, walked along the waterfront, and marveled at how much the world had changed since they had first met. They talked about the early days, about the chase across the territory, about the moment they had both known this was something special. "If I had to do it all again, I would not change a single moment," Tobias said as they stood at the rail of a ship taking a tour of the bay. "Every struggle, every hard season, every difficult decision led to the life we have now. I am grateful for all of it, even for Richard Pembroke." Delilah asked with a slight smile, "Even for him, because he led me to you. I am not grateful for what he did, but I am grateful for where it brought us." Tobias pulled her close against the cool wind coming off the water. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Delilah Fletcher. I want to make sure you know that. I do know it, just as you are the best thing that ever happened to me." She looked up at him, at this man who had aged alongside her, who had been her partner through everything. "You saved me, Tobias. Not just by getting my money back, but by showing me what real love and partnership look like. You gave me a life I never could have imagined. We gave each other that life. We built it together." He kissed her then, and it was sweet and familiar and still capable of making her heart race. They returned to the ranch renewed, ready for whatever came next. The years continued their steady march, bringing joys and sorrows in equal measure. They lost Mrs. Harris in 1915, and then Mr. Harris 2 years later, and it felt like losing parents all over again. But the community they had built supported them through the grief, just as they had supported others through their own losses. The Great War touched their lives when Daniel enlisted in 1917, determined to serve despite his parents' fears. The year he was overseas was one of the hardest of Delilah's life, waiting for letters, praying for his safety, trying to keep faith that he would return. When he finally came home in 1919, changed by what he had seen but whole and alive, She held him and wept with relief and gratitude. By 1920, Delilah and Tobias were in their 60s, officially retired from the day-to-day running of the ranch, though still involved in all the major decisions. Thomas had taken over as the primary operator, with Daniel handling the horse breeding program, and both operations were thriving. They had 6 grandchildren now, with more on the way, and the ranch that had started as just Delilah's inheritance and Tobias's savings had grown into a legacy that would support their family for generations. They spent their days doing the things they loved, Delilah in her extensive garden and Tobias still working with horses when the mood struck him. They read together in the evenings, took walks along the creek, hosted family dinners, and enjoyed the slower pace of life. The love between them had not diminished with age. If anything, it had grown stronger, tempered by decades of shared experiences and mutual support. On a spring evening in 1925, they were sitting on the porch as they had done thousands of times before, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Delilah was 65 now, her hair more silver than brown, and Tobias was 69, moving a bit slower but still strong and capable. They held hands, their fingers intertwined in the familiar way of long marriages, and watched the sun set over the mountains they loved. "Do you remember that first night we camped together, chasing Richard?" Tobias asked suddenly. "When you took second watch and I woke up to find you staring at the stars?" "I remember. I was trying to figure out if I was brave or just crazy for riding off into the desert with a stranger." Delilah smiled at the memory. "I think the answer was both. I knew that night that you were someone special. You could have given up, could have just accepted what happened and tried to move on, but you refused to be a victim. You chose to fight." Tobias squeezed her hand gently. "That strength is what I fell in love with first, even before I knew I was falling. And I fell in love with your determination to do the right thing, even when it would have been easier not to. You could have just taken the ranch payroll and gone home. But you saw someone who needed help and you helped." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "We saved each other, Tobias. We have been saving each other ever since." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, the same stars they had watched on that first night decades ago. The grandchildren were called inside by their mothers, and the ranch settled into evening quiet. Delilah thought about the journey that had brought her here, from that terrible morning in Mojave to this perfect evening surrounded by the life they had built together. She thought about Richard Pembroke sometimes, wondered if he was still alive somewhere, if he had learned anything from his years in prison, if he had any regrets. But mostly, she did not think about him at all. He was a footnote in her story, not the main chapter, and what had seemed like a tragedy at the time had actually been the beginning of everything good in her life. "I love you," she said softly, the words as true now as they had been the first time she said them more than 40 years ago. "I will love you for the rest of my life and beyond. I love you too." Tobias kissed the top of her head. "You are my heart, Delilah Fletcher. You always will be." They watched the stars come out fully, sitting together in the gathering darkness, and Delilah felt profoundly grateful for every moment, every choice, every step that had led her to this place, this life, this love that had proven stronger than betrayal and more lasting than any hardship. She had been saved by a cowboy who tracked down a thief, but more importantly, she had been loved by a man who honored his promises and built a life with her that was everything she had ever dreamed of and more. The ranch would continue after they were gone, she knew, carrying their legacy forward through their children and grandchildren and beyond. The land they had worked so hard to build and maintain would support future generations, and the love they had shared would echo through the family they had created. It was more than she had ever hoped for when she stepped off that train in Mojave all those years ago, young and naive and full of dreams that had nearly been destroyed. But dreams, she had learned, were resilient things. With the right person beside you, with determination and faith and genuine love, dreams could be rebuilt stronger than before. And sitting here with Tobias, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built together, Delilah knew that her dreams had not just survived, they had flourished beyond anything she could have imagined. She had found her home, her partner, her forever, and it was more than enough. It was everything,